Alan has
that.
I need to go buy
algebra
stamps.
tomorrow. He has, he had orchestra today. Oh, and then and I'm like, well, you don't practice. I'm like, literally?
Because I ran.
You should have all your materials.
Okay. All right, we'll see how it goes.
This one, you should have in there.
Is that what do not schedule? No, that's what.
No, I put it on there so I didn't talk to her. Tomorrow she has Chem,
Almost?
AP
You
Hug.
can't.
What's the AP hug? Is that
That's your
Geo?
Yes.
So Colin has that too. Are they in that same, are they in the class together?
With Vandrup. Take Passion, she has Spanish. Spanish, AP Hug.
He had Spanish today.
Okay.
So, okay. Randrup is,
All right,
she's a goddess.
She really is.
welcome everyone. The light is on, so we are live. We're here today to talk about boundaries. And thank you all for being here today. I'm being told I'm too far away from the mic, okay? Make sure you're close to your mic when you want to talk so we can hear you. And I think I'll just go ahead and turn it right over to Kristen.
Thank you, Chair Stivland. Today, the work session it relates to a discussion on boundaries or future boundaries or what we're looking at from the school board as far as guidance as when you want to have things happen. Just a little bit of history for those of you that weren't members of the board the last time we had gone through this process. It was during construction from the 15 bond. We were in a grade reconfiguration change and we were also closing 3 schools. There was a committee formed to create boundaries, and at the time the discussion at not only the board level but the committee level was to create district boundaries that got students through a 5-year cycle. And it was also discussed at length that we knew that the South would be a problem and that anytime after 3 years we would be looking at the South. And so here we are 3 years later looking at exactly what we had projected to be looking at the last time we did the boundary process. A couple of the items that we're hoping that the board has a discussion on and we receive direction on is kind of twofold. First off, when would you like us to look to implement boundary changes? And it is, we're looking at either the fall of 20, which would be August of this year, or the fall of 21. And we can walk through the sheet that you were provided, and there is copies available to the people that are in attendance right now as far as considerations of what can happen. We'll walk through that. So are we looking at 20? Are we looking at 21? What does the board want to do with that? And then what does the process look like based on that decision? Is there a committee? Is it internal work? What is the timeline for when the board wants to see results of whatever is done for a boundary draw? And so that is essentially the purpose of this work session. What I'd like then to do is draw your attention to the handout that you'd received, both electronically and what is placed in front of you with the Stillwater School Area Public Schools letterhead. And the very top of the page, we identify the 2 schools that right now are at capacity, where as of January of 2020, you can see that Brookview is at 481 students and Lake Elmo at 700. And then for the fall of 2020, our estimates right now are that Brookview will be at 501 students and Lake Elmo will be at 686. We are all aware, Dr. McDowell has discussed the developments that are occurring. And there is a potential developments of adding another 27 students by fall to Brookview and adding another 67 students to Lake Elmo. So you can kind of see the estimated enrollment range for the fall of 2020 for those particular schools. As an aside, due to the continued growth in the southern part of the district, administration is recommending a new demographic study to support the long-term planning. Not just what we're looking at immediate for boundaries. This is going to be moving into the community, what the community design team created as we move into referendums, looking at what our district looks like for the next 10 years, what can we estimate as we move forward. So that is just an aside, if the board would consider entertaining a new demographic study. In consideration for the boundary changes for the fall of 2020, we could address the overcrowding at Brookview and allow for space at Lake Elmo. There was a map that was presented in October at the Finance Committee level. It's also posted on our webpage of what if we moved everything into existing schools today, because we do have about 300 spaces in a combination of Rutherford, Stonebridge, and Lily Lake, where we could move students. What that would look like. And that map, I gave it to you as a supplementary document. Again, not that you would necessarily go with it, but it was the discussion that we'd already had. To do 2020, we would it would be a condensed timeline for options. The work would need to start immediately, and we'd need to complete it very soon. It also condenses the timeline for families moving to new buildings. The need to close open enrollment, which requires a board resolution and alternate enrollment by building and grade level. This is something that I cannot unilaterally do when we're going through the open enrollment process to say, you know, Brookview, we're not going to accept open or alt enrollments. The building's full. We're not going to do that. I can't say that. The board needs to pass a resolution saying, at least this year, we're not going to entertain those movement within that school because we recognize that there's capacity issues. And then there is no additional classroom space to add sections if needed. That's changes for fall of 2020. Considerations if the board chooses to wait until the fall of 2021. We are able to maintain an existing staffing timeline. That too was given to you in your supplementary information. I think Kathy had sent out an email with the staffing timeline before, just to provide some context, that we will keep staffing moving along those timelines for next year. It allows additional time to consider boundary options, probably more conducive to committee work. The results are a potential overcrowding at Brookview, Lake Elmo, and possibly Anderson. We have no additional classroom space to add sections if needed. So if the board chooses to reduce class size, we're not going to have space in those buildings to do that. Again, the need to close open enrollment and the next opportunity to adjust boundaries could coincide with a 2021 referendum, meaning you are adjusting boundaries about the same time you're asking voters for to support our initiatives. I guess at this time there is another section about considering for reopening Oak Park Elementary, and we can discuss that, but I'm going to turn it over to board members just to, like I say, to get the context of, you know, which year would you like us to look at this, and then what, you know, then provide some timelines as far as to direct my work.
And maybe just to clarify, as you're going through the numbers that Kristen pointed out at the top, those are the extremes, right? So it's not a, this is what we know is coming in. This is if it all filled out. So across that Brookview line, based simply on numbers, if all of the anticipated homes were built in time, this is what those homes would generate at that fall. So it's really kind of I guess an opportunity for you to say, here's what we're willing to take a chance on. Well, it isn't a for sure thing. The same for Lake Elmo with that 67. It's simply based on what our best guess is the maximum number of units would be built, then generating a maximum of 67. I mean, so that's where we are with that. It isn't a for sure. The second piece, and we talked a little bit about this morning at the chair superintendent meeting, is that when we have the terms like overcrowding and at capacity and things like that, there's always the option, depending upon what the capacity for the board to want to take an existing space and further subdivide it temporarily, right? So you take a building or in a space, and if you use Brookview as the example, there are spaces that are currently not designed to be classrooms. And if you had to in a short term, could you repurpose that to make it a classroom app? You could do that. That's, I mean, we've done that in the past with other things. So it really isn't it isn't a do this or. It's really, here's what the next 2 years' options are, and then whatever's decided, we're just going to have to figure out inside of that sandbox how we want to mitigate anything that happens. If we get a large group of kids at Lake Elmo, then we got to be okay with what the limited options would be until we get to the bonding or other buildings. If that makes sense.
Go ahead. Yep.
Have you run any numbers for estimates of what fall of '21 might look like?
Yep.
You're talking specific to those
I
buildings.
guess these two.
So again, I'll preface it with the best that I can do to run numbers is to take the number of units that the developers have agreed with each municipality that they think is coming in, and then try to backtrack based on the yielding percentages. So if I look at, right now, if we're looking just at Brookview, it looks like for '21, there are a potential of 6 developments that could be in place, generating a maximum potential of 175 students. And that is after I multiplied out our 73% capture rate. So I took the numbers, the yield, and then multiplied it by the 73 so we could be as accurate as we can.
Is that, for where is that?
That's Brookview. Now that, again, so I say that with caution in terms of it's a lot of, the number's huge, right? But it's, the assumption is that's your extreme end. So that's if everything goes into place, that's if everything gets built out, and that everybody moves in by the fall of 2021. So I don't really have a better way to give you an estimate other than to give you that extreme, and then we'll have to navigate back off of that of what's realistic. And as Carl Batalon pointed out a couple meetings ago, things have changed back and forth about 3-4 times. We're more certain between 20 and 21 of 2 of the developments north of Brookview, the one that's going to hit the fall or hit the spring. But out to 21, the best guess I can give you is that the 175, and then it tapers off. And the reason that number is so high in 21 is because right now, their build out is expected to happen sometime in 2021. And then the subsequent years, the developments for 22, 23, 24 are much smaller, and what they're expecting are going to build out. So there's a lump in there of a larger grouping just generated from the build out. Lake Elmo is more consistent. What Lake Elmo continues to tell me is that they're building at a rate somewhere between 200 and 250 homes per annum, so every 12 months. So if we look out to if we look at every year, if you take that figure, there's about 1,200 units left of the current developments to build out. And so if you simply take I took the average of 225 right in the middle. If you take that per year, that works out to be about 67 kids a year. So if they continue to be 200 to 250 units, and the reason that I took the average is because we don't know the number between the townhomes and the number between single-family homes. And so each of those types of units generates a different yield. So my best guess is a consistent 67 kids a year is what to plan for at this point.
Okay.
So that would get you then out again in 2021 to a maximum of 67 on the average. And then if you went to the maximum number of 250, that puts you at about 75 from that, again, that extreme end, if that's helpful. So back to the bullet point of, this is about as detailed as I can give you. If we want to get more detailed moving out, we're going to need to consider a demographer to come in and redo based off of what we now know down there.
sorry, just a quick
Go ahead, you
follow-up.
can just talk freely.
Are those numbers K-5?
Yes.
Or pre, okay.
We've stayed consistent K-5. The reason is, when I checked on our latest 2 demographic reports, that's what they based their numbers on. So I didn't want to skew how I was calculating it in comparison to how they did. So that's the other piece. You can easily make the argument there's 67 kids, but you don't know where they're going to land, right? It could be 67 kids across all 12, 13 grades. It could be 67 kids across 5 grades.
It could be 50 kindergartners.
Yeah, so that's why I think it's important to go with the extreme side. And then what's that appetite to say, okay, we'll take a risk here, but we're not willing to take a risk here?
So can I piggyback on his quickly?
Yeah.
So just in doing a little math, 100 and extreme side 2021, 175 potential kids on the extreme side, Brookview, plus 67 2020 kids on the extreme side, Brookview. So you're looking at, is that accurate that it's, you add it up and?
67.
I'm sorry, 27. So you, right, sorry.
Yep.
So it's a little over 200 potential kids on the extreme side for Brookview between 2020 and 2021.
Yep,
And-
the
and
very extreme.
Very extreme. And if that, do we have space to fill in at Brookview at the very extreme?
No, there's not enough space at Brookview to fill that many kids, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We know we don't have that much space, but that's what brings into the question of, when does it make sense for us to look at boundary changes to make whatever we need to make work? But to go back to the 175, understand that 2 of those developments, one of them is a 380 unit development and the other one's a 100 unit development. So if that 380 unit development doesn't happen, that's a ton of kids that get subtracted out of the 175. So which is why I go back to, this is really what's your appetite for risk and how you want to decide it, because it's one of those big developments even goes out a year and you just mitigated some crisis of decision-making out another 12 months, which leads into the bond.
Did you have something? Yeah.
Yes, our current enrollment again is what, 3,000, what, right now?
K5?
Pardon?
K5?
Yes.
K5?
3558-ish.
Yeah, I got the latest right here.
Okay. And it's just a frustrating position to be in, because what we were told when we closed schools was that we were not going to have overcrowding. And there are things, I read something at our December meeting, which is still on our website. There's this other one, which is still on our website, says true or false. The most recent information from the demographer and Met Council show growth for Woodbury, Lake Elmo, and Stillwater confirms minimal growth is expected. The growth will not yield significant numbers of new students. Our population is aging and new housing is attracting homeowners with fewer children. If schools are closed, remaining elementaries, schools will be overcrowded. False. Even if Marine Oak Park and Withrow are closed, we would have room for more than 4,000 students, while we're projected to have just 3,627 in 2017-18. We have less than that now, so I'm just curious what happened.
Actually, I would say we are exactly how we projected. The 4,000 students actually includes pre-K. So please, the 4,000 students includes pre-K. So you have 18 classes of pre-K, which says, it doesn't say 4,000 students K-5, it says 4,000 students. The capacity that was presented at that time for the buildings that remained open was 3,775.
Okay.
As I stated when we opened the meeting, we have 300 seats available that we can boundary to. This is exactly what the boundary committee knew, what they made a decision on, what the board supported, and where we are. We did say there would be problems in the south. That's where we were growing. We knew it, and that's where we are today. The one element that we don't control, and again, we are 3 years out where we projected it would be a problem, is the cities of both Woodbury and Lake Elmo have grown considerably faster, even beyond their comp plans, than anybody would have known or could have projected was going to happen. That is the only variance that has happened in 3 years.
So where are the 300 seats?
There is, you have about 100 at Rutherford. You have 145 at Stonebridge, and this is give or take, and you have about 50 at Lilly. And that's why you were presented a map at the Finance Committee in October that said, we can do all of this. This is a rough draw. This is what it would look like. Kids still work. Again, it's not necessarily accounting for Dr. McDowell's numbers of here are the developments that are going in, but we can do it today and have a space for every kid in an existing building.
I'm aware that it was presented at the Finance Committee, but I thought the way boundary changes were done in the district is that there was a committee and that there were different options presented.
There absolutely can be. The whole point of what was presented at the Boundary Committee and what was stated at that time was it was a rough draft to say, look, we can do it. We can form a committee and people can walk through the process, and that's very appropriate. This was just to show that every building wasn't full and we could still make it work within the buildings that we have at that time. That was the intent.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in here. I feel like I don't have an appetite for proposing any kind of boundary changes for 2020. And it sounds like, based on the numbers we have here, hopefully we can kind of make it work for 1 year. But because it's such a fluctuating situation, I agree. I think we do need a new demographic study. And I think we do need to take the time to get the new whatever boundaries that we may decide we want to do, like, correct. I think we do need to consider what this building might be used for. I think people need to weigh in on that. I mean, it's obviously space that we could use, so let's talk about what might work, let's just at least consider it. And then, obviously we're just, getting ready to receive some information from the community design team on, what new facilities we need going forward. So all of that, to me, is really important information for us to have to consider that ties directly into whatever we do with boundaries. I feel like if we try to do something now, we're going to make a rush. We're going to, it just seems really rushed to me.
A related question, Bob, I'm curious, and maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't. In your conversations with Carl,
Yep.
and you alluded to two developments, one was 380, and I think
380,
the other one,
there's a 380.
yeah, 380, and the other one was about 100. Are there indicators along the way, like if we did what Sarah proposed and did not move boundaries this year, say even the next school year starts and all of a sudden you see, hey, they broke more ground, or what does Carl or what do others use to confirm that 380 along the way? Or do they wait till they're all done and that's it?
So that's the question that I keep asking them to push, like, can you give me what we're calling the build-out rates? And it doesn't seem that there's any confirmation other than when you see the sewer and water being put in. Because once the sewer, I think he explained, I think I remember him talking about that. That's kind of there. That's when we know that it's at least started. Because once the infrastructure's in, then that tells you that the developers are ready to.
They're going to start pulling permits.
Well, and see,
Somewhere.
what I'm looking at is sort of like, I have a pretty good idea when I go past where White Oaks is. And
Yep.
all of a sudden I see they dug a big hole. To me, that's an indicator something's coming. And I'm saying, even with this additional 380, do you count those? Do you look at building permits?
Yep.
What are kind of the
So-
indicators?
My game plan moving forward, since we learned how fast it's changing, has been to just continue to check in with them more frequently. So I have taken all their information. I have it in a spreadsheet now, highlighting what do we know, again, without a demographer doing it. Like I said, the best I can tell you is right now that 380 is maybe it's going to go in. It's planned to go in, but Could somebody back out? Absolutely, I think
Yeah.
at this point.
See, that's what I'm wondering, because like, for example, not too far from where you and I both live, off of Boutwell, they put in that new one, I think it's on Crescent or something like
Yep.
that. And I walked that, and it's platted.
Yep.
Well, that tells me something's coming.
Yep.
Now, I'm saying that's one stage, and if you said, well, they got 380 holes dug or something like that, that's another stage. But to me, that would raise our alarm or say it's got a ways to go yet.
Yep, I would say in that area, Brookview, so Carl talked a little bit about this. There's the Maplewood development that's just northeast of Brookview. I would say that's your for sure. That's going in 2 stages. That's going to be a combination. Well, that's what we typically, those are going to be typically what we see as developments of townhomes and single-family homes. That one seems to be pretty for sure. We know that the multifamily development, the multifamily development that's going in on the corner of Hudson Road right there, that's already been graded. They're grading, that one's going in. So that will just depend upon how fast it fills up. Then there is another one that looks to be about 200 potential, but only 100 to be built out. That's calculated in the number that I gave you. By 21, 100, and then another 100, but that one is the one included in that 280 that if it goes,
Right.
you'll have it.
So, but we're fairly confident by 2020 that those high ranges are the highest we would go for 2020, right?
It's my best guess.
So I think we're getting maybe going a little ahead of where we need to be. Because I think to reiterate, what you need, is there enough of an appetite to really look at 2020? Or is the board saying, we think we can make it work with these numbers, and then you'd need to know the process?
That's the first decision. If
Yes.
the board can say tonight, don't worry about 2020, let's keep going and we can go down that path.
Thank you for the information that you presented on the capacities at Brookview and Lake Elmo. And also, I was not aware in the past that the board had to actually do a
To close.
Resolution.
resolution to stop any enrollment. So, for instance, Lake Elmo in the past had over 900 students. That could have been halted before it got bursting at the seams as it was. I guess I'm not interested myself in boundary changes now. I think it's a little premature because we still have such a big plan to develop, and I don't want to have another then boundary change soon after that. But I think I would like to entertain the idea of what is max capacity that we maybe would like to do a resolution to stop increasing enrollment so we don't get to that point of things being uncomfortable in those schools before we're ready.
Absolutely, and just realize, if a kid, though, is zoned there, they have rights to attend there.
Right.
It's the ones looking to get in that aren't zoned there.
Right.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything?
I'll ask a
ahead.
question. What if, we're looking at 2020 then, with those numbers, what does that look like on the inside of Brookview and Lake Elmo? Looks like Lake Elmo might be relatively stable to what they are this year.
Yep.
Brookview appears to be up somewhat from this year. Do you know what that might look like? Because obviously we
Yeah,
talked about.
so from an instructional space, so having done no plans with it, because we wouldn't start entertaining, because that gets people, the minute you throw it out there, then people get kind of uppity about what are we doing with this. However, the thing to remember with Lake Elmo, we'll start there, is the 5th grade class is about 145, 146 kids right now, and it's the biggest class there. So theoretically, if everything holds true from a space of classrooms, we're going to free up one classroom space when they move out to 6th grade because the following classes are smaller. They're not at that 140, 150. So with Lake Elmo, what we would anticipate is if the kids come in, you'd have a little bit of wiggle room for an extra space there. Then, if you go larger, if you go bigger than that, have more kids, now you're in the same spot you are with Brookview. You have to look at where are your larger spaces that aren't currently classrooms that you could turn into temporary learning spaces inside of the building. So no different than art at Brookview, right? So you take the concept of, you take an open space and you say, can we repurpose this for X amount of time to do this? So Brookview, you have, the thing with Brookview is you know that you have the open learning spaces between the classrooms. I have no idea what that would look like until we would go in and look for it. But my guess is that that's what we would try to figure out, is how could we build an extra learning space inside of those common spaces to accommodate a section's worth of class.
Which I just want to acknowledge really quick, like, that's not ideal, obviously, right?
No,
That's not ideal. But it is something we have done in the past. For example, at Rutherford, I think at one point we had over 800 students there. Now there's about 560 or something. And when I go in that building now, it feels pretty full. I can't imagine having 800 students, but they made it work. You know, they used the spaces that were available. And for a temporary solution, it can be fine.
Yeah, we're a little more, yeah, yep.
I know you presented this information in the board packet, the 14-year enrollment. The 14-year enrollment projections, or the history that you have, you presented all of the breakdowns. Could you, or do you know offhand what open and alternate enrollment is to Brookview and Lake Elmo?
How many kids are currently in there that weren't assigned to, or you're
Yeah,
saying?
open and alternate, currently there right now.
I can't
You don't know
possibly pull that
offhand.
off the top of my head.
That would actually
sitting
be
here.
good to know, though, if we could get that at some point, yeah.
If we have that sheet.
Yeah, it's in a board
That
packet.
opens
Yeah.
a couple times.
Yeah.
Who comes in from
Again, I
where.
just wasn't
Yeah, I wasn't either.
prepared, prepared for that. I have it, I know I have it. And here's, I guess, maybe to say, absolutely, it doesn't change where we are today. So, you know, as we have discussions on, I don't know that it alters the timeline of either the fall of 20 or the fall of 21, because it is what it is at this point. But it's certainly a conversation of how to proceed.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested to know how many boundaried students are in the buildings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can get
On
that.
boundaries.
Yeah, we
Bob's
can get
working
that,
on it.
yeah.
I lost
Jen,
the
did you have
internet for
something you
some
wanted to say?
reason.
Yeah, I tend to be nervous about the idea of the boundary change for 2020, given, we haven't had a demographic update in quite some time, and that's a concern to me. I would really, you know, it's a big guess, you know, that we're making here, but the bigger concern for me is, so even if we make it in 2021, you know, you've got this number of kids at Brookview and Lake Elmo, and we wait for a bond referendum to pass in 2021. Hopefully, it passes. You know, then what's the timeline for those schools to be, those kids to be in those classrooms in the, you know, added on to Brookview, and B, you know, what if it doesn't pass? So it's, my concern is just, I mean, if we're looking at these numbers, even if it's a guess, this is incredibly massive. And I mean, is the building that, Mark, there's a development that's right off the back of Brookview that's, it's past that tree line. Is that what he was talking about in this? Is that the?
It's northeast of Brookview.
Okay, and what
Yeah.
is that number again, the Maplewood Northeast of Brookview? What is that? Because that's gonna go. I mean, market is strong right now. It's,
That total development for that is expected to be 154 units.
what's the density? Densities, is it?
Those are
Family?
single families, so
Okay.
it's about a 0.4.
Okay,
So that's the one, though, that I've got calculated out at 38 homes a year over
okay.
the plan.
Is that what they expect they can be built that
Yeah.
fast?
They-
I thought it was
That's
lower.
if you remember Carl's his presentation, he said that first year you can expect 2 to 4 homes as the model goes up,
Right.
and then they'll hit their build-out cycle. So in my conversations with them, we've calculated like 4 to 6 homes in that first run, and then it'll hit it. If you divide the rest out, it'll be like 38 homes a year.
Okay,
So again, it's all assumptions, but
right. Well, that's good to know. It's only 38 homes in a year, you know, in each place. But the one is an apartment building or something, right? So that would happen, that would
that's
probably
the
go
one
faster.
that's basically the one that's on the corner of Hudson Road
Right,
and that
okay.
multi-family.
So that's the one that's bigger and that could actually happen faster. I guess I would like to know from the board, if you guys want to weigh in, tell me if this is wrong, but I'm kind of getting a feeling that there isn't really an appetite at all for looking at boundary changes for 2020 at this point.
Do we
Does
wanna raise
anybody weigh in
hands?
on that specific question? Yes or no? Talk about, like, the boundary changes for 2020 are pretty much, I mean, I've heard from some people here. Did you want to speak to
Well,
that?
there's, I guess one thought, and I think it was stated in this, is if we do talk about boundary changes in 2021, that of course coincides with when we're going out for a bond and levy referendum. So we should consider that too, how that could impact our efforts to have the public supporting us when we're having potential boundary changes.
Well, and if I
Something
may,
interesting to think about, yeah.
along those lines, I think the most tempting right now is say, leave everything still till 2020. But I think
21, 21.
Yeah, but put yourself in the position of a parent who's trying to project and maintain stability. Would it be better to know sooner? Or do you kind of leave it static and then a year from now, then boundaries change?
Right, and that because that's a concern of mine. I think
Yeah,
we have,
I
have some who
think
are-
parents, we've gotten some parents who've expressed that. They haven't worded it exactly like that, but I think that's what they're talking about.
right, and that's where I think, for me, I would want a little bit more time to know what's coming, where it feels like the timeline might be so tight right now that they'll be finding out late. And I don't know if we've done boundary changes close to bond and levy before, but the decision would be made in the spring, right? So people would be transitioned into their new schools before we actually go to the polls, right?
It would. It just, sometimes there's angst. That's all. I would like to go back, thank you Bob for pulling this up. Attending from within the boundaries is 434.
From Brookview.
Yeah. That was October.
One other kind of, and again, I don't want to go too far in that, but I looked at like safety valves, or Jen expressed her concern of nervousness, what if you get bigger numbers? It seems to me two equal kind of goals, and I know one's not on the table now, but is the idea sometimes what probably is a safety valve, at least for some numbers, is kids who qualify for the GATE program. So they leave their home school, and especially, I don't know what the percentage of those might be at Brookview or at Lake Elmo. But I think there's perhaps more room still at Stillwater Middle School. So if you're going to keep it there, does that offer any potential for kids?
I would say not particularly in looking at this year's numbers, in part because there are currently 7 students that are boundaried for Brookview that have chosen to attend GATE. So it's 7.
But the only other one, and that's why I said it's with the second link, I think we run a pretty minimal GATE program from my vantage point. So I'm saying,
Yeah.
and again, not to solve that tonight, but looking at possibly expanding that program, maybe even kids who qualify, or even potentially the grades for kids.
That's a really interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that. I appreciate that. Go ahead.
So do we have the number for boundaried students for Lake Elmo also? 'Cause you said it was 434 for Brookview, right?
As of October 1, yes. And It is total attending from within boundaries at Lake Elmo on October 1 was 572.
Kristen, what's the total? The total at Lake Elmo, 572 out of how many?
The Lake Elmo enrollment was 697.
Yep.
Have we ever closed off an open enrollment or alternate enrollment historically that anyone can think of? Is that something we've done?
I think we've had to close sections, right? I mean, that's something that, you know,
Certain
fifth grade
grades.
is full, we can't take anymore. And that's what alternate really is, right? If there's space, we'll take you. I think open, don't you have to by state law?
That's what I'm
the-
telling, you have
so
to
it's the
pass.
open.
It's the open.
And we could, because I think, if I understand the law correctly, you just have to provide them space at a school in your district.
That's correct.
It doesn't have to be that school.
That's correct.
That they want to attend.
Yes.
So just to piggyback, because it's here and it's come up here and there, you know, for a long time. You know, the considerations for reopening Oak Park Elementary, you know, I guess I'm curious of people's thoughts. You know, we've got transitions currently at Oak Park, and that's something that I thought we were going to try to make improvements to. What are we doing with those students, young people? And I thought central services, I thought admin was going to go over to Oak Park, so what happens to central services? Or that move? And then what is three, and I don't know who's going to answer this, but what is the CDT? Can someone talk about that from last night? I wasn't there, but I think 4 people were there. And then also, what, Superintendent Pontrelli, perhaps you could bring this or answer this. When Bold occurred, the recommendation that the board effectively voted on, it was my interpretation that the rationale for Oak Park, in part, was because it was one of the lowest capture rate schools in the district, meaning the students who were assigned to Oak Park, for whatever reason, didn't attend to the level that was sustainable. And then subsequently, we had to kind of the district at the time had to fill it in with the other programs, such as, you know, ASD and Gates, where my son attended. So I guess you know, I mean, it comes up. You know, I think it's time to just, you know, hit it, because we can't continue to delay these conversations. I mean, I guess I'm just curious as to, you know, what would happen then if we reopen Oak Park as an elementary school? Have we talked about what happens at transitions? What would that mean for open enrollment, you know, alternate enrollment? You know, if kids are not, for whatever reason, wanting to attend that school, would we have to close off? Would we have to not provide that choice for students to consider another school?
So I would say, because I want to have those conversations, and I think we should. I think for the question tonight about 2020 or 2021, and then I think administration really wants to know, based on that, what's the process that the board wants to see for the boundary change? Do we want a committee, or how do we want that process to go? I think maybe that, like, I do want to talk about that, but I think for being able to help them know what to do.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in too. I really appreciate that, both comments. I feel like one of the goals of having this meeting right now is to provide some clarity to our community and to maybe provide some reassurance for those who may be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to deal with boundary changes right away or something. So I feel like we do need to get some clarity around whether we're looking at boundary changes for 2020, which means a very tight timeline and maybe fewer options, or whether we say, okay, we're going to try and make do as best as we can with the spaces we have, and for 1 year, and then we're going to go through a comprehensive process that really does dig deep into what all the different options are, so that we can, you know, make the best choices for boundary changes looking at 2021. And if we start talking about it in a realistic way now, then people will say, okay, we know it's coming. And then we can talk about what the process should look like. Because I believe, what my experience with boundary changes is, it's a pretty comprehensive process that allows a lot of community involvement, community weigh-in. You hear all about it for a long, long time before the actual change is made. So maybe we can talk to that.
I do, I agree. It just, someone did bring it up earlier, so, and it's in our packet of information. So we're either going to hit it or we're not, and I think it's all part of the discussion. I still want to know, because it's here, we're staring at it, considerations for reopening Oak Park Elementary is part of our conversation for tonight. So what was the CDT recommendation last night? These people have put hours of their life into this work, so what was their recommendation?
They're preparing their presentation. They'll be presenting to the board.
Okay.
February 20th, I believe. Is that right?
13th. Is it the 20th or the 3rd?
No, we don't have anything on the
20th.
13th.
Okay.
It's the 20th. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm in favor of the demographic study, so, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm glad you said that too. It sounds like that's something we need. Since you brought it up, I really want to make sure we get one that we know we can trust that's really timely. Because it seems like some of these demographic studies are kind of more 20 years out, trends of aging and population changes and stuff like that. But what we need is like up to the minute, day-to-day updates on what's happening in our community. So I'm not sure if that's a demographics report or as much as a population,
Right, I think it's.
update.
Bob can, because he's been living the demographic.
He's doing a pretty good job
role.
of it, I think.
He's done a great job. The reality is that no company that you work with is going to give you the day-to-day. Just because what we've shared with you here today, what we're trying to give you is the plat plans, when they're estimated, but so much of that just depends on the economy, to be honest. I think things will probably be pretty strong through this next election cycle. And when people are predicting a recession at some time, I would think that most developers are going to say, okay, let's get people in here. So there really isn't anything day-to-day other than you've got the best day-to-day sitting at the end of this table. I mean, that's what he's doing, is updating week by week. The trends that you were talking about that you've gotten from, for instance, from Hazel Reinhardt in the past, all of those impact your long-term. And when you look at this project, and I think John Hunig said it well last night, is if we do go with the 2021 bond, and then you go through the planning that you need to do, if you have new elementaries or remodel, all those kind of things, it will probably be 2024 before you have students in new spaces. So that almost brings you out to your 5-year plan. So you need somebody who's going to help you look at the next 5 years. And the only way you can do that is look at all the different formulas and put in the trend information that we have. If you look back, Hazel's numbers for this district and others have been really pretty spot on. We've already done a little bit of looking into, I think Hazel was about 18,000.
19.5.
19.5 for a full study again. We've touched base with Washington County, who's used someone differently. They are looking at even a larger, I think close to, well, I won't even guess right now because I don't know how public that is, but they're looking at a huge bond referendum for the district. And so they used a company that is out of Texas.
Out of Texas, Davis.
Yeah.
Yep.
That looks impressive, and so we could come back, if the board is interested, come back and say, these are the companies that are available now, this is what you get for this much money, this is what you get for this much, and you could decide what you might want to go
So do we go out for bids for that, or do we, okay, can we put that on one of our very soon? Because I do agree that what we have only takes us to, 2024,
Well,
and we need
Yeah.
beyond that.
Do you need board direction to be able to do that? Don't you have that?
Well, actually, it wouldn't be bids, it would be quotes, which I actually have, because Hazel was my charge, so I actually have Hazel's proposal again, and we have her report, so we know what that looks like. So then it would just be the quotes that we would get from other companies and what their material looks like.
And I guess I was just wondering, you don't need board direction to get the quotes, right? You can get the quotes and then bring them to us, and then we can make a
You
decision.
can just give us direction now, you
Yeah.
don't need a
Yeah.
formal
Right.
vote.
We're hearing that we're going to
We're hearing,
go
find the
get
information.
it.
Do it.
Go get
okay?
it, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's something we need, right? At least we can look at.
Can I ask
go
a
ahead.
question? So, timing, concern about the timing of it. how long can we expect, if you could throw out a timeline, is it this something that could be turned around? Say we get it on the next agenda, or, whatever it is, 1 to 2 agendas out, and then say, go, we've picked our, trusted or, whomever we're going to choose for that, and then go out and do it. What do you think timeline, how long is?
Month?
Yeah, is it, are we talking months, 6 months, 4 months, 3 months? Any idea at all?
I'd guess 3.
3, okay, okay.
Yeah, you're probably 3-4 months, depending upon when they can start.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's always
Okay.
that.
So
Right.
wherever you end up in the
Full-time, They
queue,
can start right away.
Okay, thank you.
once it's
I think something else that might be helpful too, the Texas group sounds intriguing, but maybe just because they're from Texas. And so I think it would be helpful to know the features that South Wash found appealing to go that far to bring somebody
yep,
in.
and I'd want to share that with you because that's what I found appealing about it. That's the question I asked them. I wanted to see what.
That's not the norm, and other people have probably done studies, but
Yep.
that doesn't mean that's a bad idea. It might be an excellent idea if they give you the answers.
We could at least give you a couple options that, and whatever you feel makes the most sense for you.
Could you say more about that, Mike? I don't know that I know.
Well, I'm just saying, I don't know what it is that they do that Hazel doesn't do, or
Yep.
somebody like that.
So South
Or is it
Wash?
just like going to a doctor and you go to the doctor who gives you the best results?
So here's for example, I think what I'm hearing you saying is, that I could tell you that I saw in it. When this company, when I looked at the information they gave to South Washington County, back to the breakdown of potential yields, they break it down by grade level. So their numbers tell you, here's what we anticipate.
That's cool.
From K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then high school, which is something we haven't seen in our other studies. So stuff like that, I think is what you're asking is what's the difference?
Yeah, because obviously if you're going to Texas, you're going
Should
to
break
pay
that down that way.
more. And so what are you going to get for it? That doesn't mean it's bad. It might be great if they give you more information or valuable
I don't know.
information.
Okay, so I think I just want to get some clarity. We're not looking at boundary changes for 2020, at least as from what I can tell so far. But if we start talking about boundary changes for 2021, Kristen, do you think, could you talk a little bit about what that process will
Absolutely.
look like or what options we have? How do we begin?
Well, I'll run through how it was done the last time. So a committee was formed, and we had taken, and I want to say boundaries were done in 11, which was prior to my tenure with the district, but we took the committee that was still willing to come from 2011 and place them on the, whatever it was, 2016, 15, 16 committee, in part because it's a steep learning curve.
Okay.
There's a lot of detail to it, so anybody who has information and who has gone through the process, you get a jump start on the work. Nonetheless, you form a committee, and that committee, at least the last time, consisted of someone from every area. There was Withrow Marine, break it all the way down. There was a representative, and then there was building level staff. That's how it formed. The committee then, or at the time when we were forming a committee, the board was also working on a guiding change document, which is in your supplemental information, that said, here's our reality, here's our desired results, here's our non-negotiables. So, we will not break a law is a non-negotiable. We will not bus a kid more than 75 minutes. We will not, what it does is it sets the parameters or the sandbox, if you will, for the committee's work. So that way, when you're at committee and ideas are being thrown out, it helps the process significantly because you're not all over the map. It's nope, the board said this is what is important, this is what we need to go. One of the examples was, you do not pass, you will not boundary to pass one elementary school to get to another. Like you're not gonna, that's not what it's going to work, what's going to work. That might be something, but nonetheless, the board established the rules at the same time we were forming the committee. The committee went, did their work, came back to the board with a few options merely as a report at that time. Then we went to the public. We had a few meetings, one at Oakland, one at Stillwater Middle, allowed community feedback. Committee then took that back, redid some work, went to the board with a final couple of recommendations, and the board made a decision. So, and I want to say that process probably was 3 to 4 months. So now, if we're looking at 2021, it would be helpful for me to know when the board wants to be having that conversation about a final boundary decision. Please keep in mind that today is the deadline for open enrollment, January 15th. So that paperwork's already in. Kindergarten orientation is in February. And so back to the ability for families to plan, to people to know what's going on. Quite honestly, if you hit this time of year next year, you're too late. So when does the board want that to be happening? So there is a decision, so staff can plan, families can plan, everybody's very aware of what the fall of 21 will look like.
So it sounds to me that maybe by November would be time to, if we had a decision by then, it would give families time to decide, do I want to go for alternate enrollment? Am I good with this? Does that sound right? So then backing up from there, 4 months, you're looking at getting started.
Well, ideally, what I would do if we're going to move forward with the demographic study, again, having that information, I would love to be working on this coming into the spring, early summer with the board and establishing a committee, because sometimes schedules are just a little easier, hard, you know, you don't want to, there's that first back to school rush, there's events, calendars get full, so some of that work I'd like to spread out just a little bit to allow participation.
Right.
But at least I can map it that way. You know, if I have, the board needs it by this date, then I can backwards map it into knowing what that's going to look like. But ideally, you guys are setting a guiding change with maybe some demographic information late spring, early summer.
Thanks. Okay. So if we were to, and here's looking at the years, you know, if Brookview would have been added on to, we would have had the 8 classrooms, and that would have been ready by, would it have been ready by the fall, this 20? When would back in November, the November vote, they say that went, would it have been ready by this upcoming fall?
Fall of 21.
21, okay. So say in fall of, say we pass the referendum and a bond. So say we're doing the boundary changes for 21, in 2021, and we pass a bond referendum same year, and that passes. Brookview is expanded, 8 classrooms. Are then we looking at another boundary change in 3-4 years after that?
Well, Brookview, even though Denise had said, you know, this is your timeline, like you're looking at 24 if something passes, the advantage we have to Brookview, it is we're farther along. As far as concept draws, you know, what that would look like. So we can move a little bit quicker. We're not starting from scratch on a site. Okay. So Brookview could potentially, given the timeline, open with the additional space in 23.
Right, about 18 months.
Right.
But would that still need another boundary change
Well, but back to the committee's work of the board's going to set the guiding change, and if it's, you know, that's when you have that conversation of, we want this, we don't want this. I mean, that's when you start going, how does this look and what are we willing to, how much are we willing to hedge our bet?
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
So the CDT is coming February 20th. I think we probably need to plan from there and then move out to when we're going to make a decision and a recommendation and what we're going to do and do these simultaneously with moving forward, then bringing in the committee to start planning changes in what we're doing. So we probably need to establish at this time as well when we're going to come back with, at what time we're going to come back with our recommendations and what we're going to plan on doing for bond levy.
Right, which,
Yeah.
sorry, I think we come after the demographic study to make sure we're on the right track with what's
Yeah.
the recommendation.
We're going to need to be doing all of it at once, I think, Liz, and then.
I just wanted to clarify something really quick, and I would love to talk about Oak Park too. I think I've made it no secret that I would love this building to be open. But one of the things you said, Jen, is that Oak Park was closed because it had the fewest students from attendance boundaries. That's why we had to put ASD and Gate. I think it was the other way around. I think because Gate and ASD were both there, that it had less room for students in the attendance boundary to go there. I was a long-term sub here, and in the fourth grade, we had each had 33 students in our classroom. So I don't think that it was, I think it's because of those
I
spaces
think we
being
should
full.
ask, I don't know, do you want to clarify that?
I can answer. Well, what I can say is based on the enrollment report that Tina, that we were talking about earlier, based on that report, the capture rate of who was boundaried in that area to who attended the school in that area, Oak Park was one of the lowest. It was 50-some% is what I'm saying.
Right, but I'm saying space-wise, it was limited because Gate took up space and because the ASD program took up space also.
Well, I think it's close to St. Croix Prep, so I mean, that's certainly a big competitor.
And I think-
And we had large class sizes
But,
and
you
only
know,
two
I think
sections.
all of that is interesting to talk about. I don't know that it really applies that much right now because we're in a different time frame. So everything's different now, right?
Yeah.
So did you have something you wanted to say, Mark?
Are we done with that question? I guess
No, it was just a comment.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to follow up, I think, on Tina's comment that the timing then, before we get the committee together, we as a board have to have our decision as to essentially what the bond question is going to be, I think, right? So that means this spring, we have to put that together.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have a busy few months ahead of us.
So just to recap, what I'm hearing is plan on 21.
Yeah.
Based on that, I'm going to, and the goal then would be committee work or the process to look similar as to what it did last time with a final recommendation coming to the board in November of 21 for boundaries estimate.
November of 20, right?
Oh, excuse me, of November of 20. Yes, I'm sorry, yes. And that the board can then plan on some form of a resolution coming forward to them for action for this next fall as it relates to Brookview and Lake Elmo.
Can I just interject something on that, Chair? Yes, but I guess, again, for me, I remain concerned that we haven't had an updated demographic study in a long time, and I am concerned that what if the demographic study comes back and says, no, Brookview that area is even more aggressive. I'm very concerned about that. So
Well, I think that ties into the bond. I mean, I think it's all going to tie together.
Right.
It's all about timing of everything. So we've got growth happening. We don't know exactly where and when. We're starting to get inklings. We obviously need more space. So we're working on that. But in the meantime, we got to figure out, how to manage what we have. And it's all got to go together, I think. And I think you're right. We do need the demographic study. I think we all are in agreement that we need that, right? And
yes,
right?
it's hard, no one wants to move kids. Certainly not me, but I just am so worried that, they're going to come back and say it's way more aggressive than even your numbers. And I can't even stand the thought of that school being more
Right.
it's concerning.
Which hopefully, if we're doing the demographics to help us know whether the long-range plan is good, while we're preparing to do boundaries, we should have the demographics back before we have to start the boundary change committee, right? Or at least you can start forming the committee, but
Form the committee meeting dates, yeah.
but they would have that information available to them, and we would have it available to us as we are making, our final decision on what the bond would look like, right? Kind of in tandem.
This is very quick, I'm sorry.
Yes.
If we did do a resolution to say close open enrollment, that wouldn't be retroactive, and we would not be kicking people out.
No.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear in case people heard that and thought,
It would set the parameters for enrollment for next year.
right,
Right.
thank you.
Okay, Thank you. I have to apologize, everyone. I need to leave to go. There is a 9:16 board meeting at 6 o'clock. I need to leave, and I'm going to leave the rest of the meeting in the trusting hands of Director Pearson, and I will look forward to talking to you all more about this later. Thank you so much for the great conversation.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Can I just add something real quick here? And to kind of piggyback up on your comment, Jen, Bob kind of laid out the max numbers or the highest numbers possible up until that point, but I think we just also have to be realistic about the fact that we don't know what the market's going to do over the next 2 years. So
I
you don't have a
absolutely
lot
agree
of
with that.
control over
I completely agree with that. I
that
just.
far out.
And I understand your concern about, we don't want to move kids more than we need to, or more,
Right.
So I agree with that. And so the demographic study should give us the information that we would need to know what the bond needs to look like, which will help the boundary committee know how they should move things. And they can take into consideration, right? Like, this is what we're going for in the bond, but we know and they'll know, we don't know that it will pass. This is where we're going. And I think in the guiding change for last time, it was a possibility of what might happen. So some of that's probably going to be the same. We're not going to know everything, but hopefully that demographic study will help us be able to make a recommendation for the bond, and will help the boundary committee kind of know what direction we're going to go.
Historically, how do folks get on the boundary committee if they're interested? Is there like a questionnaire, or how does that work?
So what happened in the past is, again, we try to bring back the committee of old in particular areas, and then it was, again, it was representation, whoever, and I want to say people went to their building level principal, a parent or whomever, and said, dear Mr. Gordy, I have interest in this. Okay. Mr. Gordy reaches out to me and says, hey, I have a few parents that would be interesting, and I'd be like, send one over. So we have representation as a whole at different grade levels, and then, like I say, we have a lot of history there too that can.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
I assume that Brookview and Lake Elmo are the two pressure points in the district, but I just wanted to make sure before we leave and say, yes, 2021 is the year. Oakland Middle School, where are we there? Do we have issues coming?
So Oakland's gonna absorb that 145, that bigger section next year, right? So as those fifth graders become sixth graders from Lake Elmo,
Yeah.
they're gonna go to Oakland. So Andy Fields is gonna have a bubble that's gonna go through his building. It's gonna be sixth grade next year, seventh grade the following year, eighth grade that following year. So he's already in the process of planning kind of the same thing. Principals oftentimes are put in a spot where they've got to do this. How do I navigate a bubble of kids? He'll be in the same, after that, it's the same question that we talked about with Brookview or Lake Elmo. If a bunch of kids come in and more than what we anticipate comes in sixth grade or seventh grade, then we may have to look at being more creative inside of the building that we have. But right now, Oakland Middle School, as a sixth grade staff, and I know they've already started this, is just going to have to work to find ways to be creative with that bubble at this point. The other piece that we have to watch and continue to watch is that feed into Oakland, just in the grand scheme of things, because if this fifth grade class comes in as a larger class, and for some reason the following year across all of the feeder elementaries, that next sixth grade class becomes larger. Now we've got more than just a bubble. We've got a change in trajectory.
And I have talked to some of you randomly, like we could, as a short-term solution, and I don't know if I'd do it for a year, you could say, well, because Anderson is a smaller school as far as a fifth grade class, you could take Anderson and say, okay, instead of feeding to Oakland, you're going to feed to Stillwater Middle. You relieve 60 kids pressure. The thing is, what you have to consider is you could do that, but if we're going to do the boundary change process, naturally, students are going to have to move from the schools that feed Oakland to the schools that feed Stillwater Middle. So you'll get this because you're going to push components to Rutherford and to Stonebridge and to Lilly, which then automatically raises Stillwater middles if we're waiting till 21. So I don't know that I'd change who feeds whom if we know that we're doing a full-scale boundary that's going to push people central to north regardless.
And I think that's important to state out there, because I think there are some concerns about even switching, as you say, Anderson over to Stillwater Middle. I assume that if we all agree that we're going to be talking about 2021, that's across the
everything.
board.
Right.
And so that
Absolutely.
the current fifth graders know that they're going to be going to the middle
Mm-hmm.
school where they thought that they'd be going to next year.
Right, where the current fourth graders may not, right? That's
we don't
the,
know.
right.
Well, but then they would be going to a different elementary school. I mean, that's the thing. So it's an all over. If we're going to do boundaries, we're doing it, which naturally changes, then we're doing it for the whole district.
Right, right. Mike,
Is
did
that
you-
why those 170, 80 kids are at Oakland, is just stability year to wait and see what happened?
Well, again, yes, that's what is naturally going there because that's how the feeders are designed. I don't know that you have to change your feeders because you don't want to change them only to change them back with
I agree.
a district-wide boundary
Yeah,
change.
and that's my question. And I think that's what went into your reasoning.
Right, right. If it's a bubble, it's a bubble, and otherwise it needs to be part of the boundary as a larger discussion.
Because I'm saying strictly geography, Anderson's not that far from Stillwater Middle.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, if we weren't going to be doing boundaries for the entire district, I would personally stand here and say, let's get those 60 some odd kids up to Stillwater Middle. I would. But seeing we're doing the change to be effective in 21, I hold. I mean, if we're holding on the elementary, hold. Because you'll have multiple transitions at a small condensed grade level, and I'm certain that
But that kind of reinforces the whole idea of not changing boundaries for 2020.
well, no, because what you would do is if you did change boundaries for 2020, you would adjust all of your elementary schools, which would make Oakland smaller and Stillwater.
So Kristen, when would you anticipate bringing the guiding change, that the guiding change would need to be passed by the board?
What I would ask the board is we can start working on it, and then you can wait for the demographics. So that's just the one little piece that, that's hanging out there. Or I can wait until we have the demographic and then then it's going to be a work session to probably tackle it all at once. So it's really the board's pleasure on how you want to approach the guiding change.
Okay,
Take your information today, everything that you've shared, and kind of lay it on a calendar for you so you can look and
Perfect.
adjust.
okay. So you'll work on getting some demographics.
Demographics, and I'll work on kind of updating a guiding change. We had, just for us, and it's probably going to look very similar to what you have, and then we'll just, you can start making adjustments or getting your thoughts together around that.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything else around that? Or is there anything else you need clarity on?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, if anything else comes up, I would just let Sarah know that you've had some other thoughts or questions.
The one thing I would like to say, so I explained how people got on the committee before. If someone approaches a board member, of course, you act in the same way. Just notify me that this person would like to be on, and I will reach out to them and go from there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. We're done early.